Good morning, everybody. My name's Kate Wyke, and I'm Wales Manager for Contact Cymru. And we're a charity for families of children with disabilities and additional needs of any kind, from birth to the age of 25, with and without diagnosis. So thank you for joining our PIP webinar this morning. I've introduced myself, so I'd also like to introduce Zoe Bowen, who's our Information Officer at Contact. And today's webinar is run by Melissa Davis, who's the Senior Welfare Benefits Advisor at Irwin Mitchell Legal Firm, and supported by Molly Whitehouse, their Business Development Executive at Irwin Mitchell Legal Firm. And just to let you know, running webinars is just one of the things we do at Contacts. We also have helplines, guides, lots of other events happening and support for you. You can use this as much or as little as you want to. So during the session, we might send you some information in the chat around Contact and also Irwin and Mitchell. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to do that in the chat already. When we ask questions, we will stop the recording. So I'm going to hand over now to Melissa, but thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Kate. Morning, everyone. My name's Melissa, as Kate introduced me. I'm a Welfare Benefits Advisor at Irwin Mitchell. If we go to the next slide, please, Molly. So yeah, I'll be speaking to you today. There's my contact details there on screen, my telephone number and email address. If anybody has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer those as well. Next slide, please, Molly. So today I'm here to talk to you about personal independence payment benefit. It's very topical. Probably you've seen it a lot in the news this week. So I'll cover a little bit of that, those changes within my talk today. I did prepare these slides before the government announced anything, so I haven't got anything in there, but I'll sort of cover bits and bats as we go through with that. So the topics will be personal independence payment, the rates of personal independence payment, the application process and tips in terms of doing that, information about becoming an appointee, the descriptors of personal independence payment, appeals for personal independence payment, the transfer process from Disability Living Allowance to PIP, carers allowance, and then PIP and the trigger of other benefit entitlement. So we'll start with the next slide, please. Okay, so what is personal independence payment? You've probably heard of it on the news, definitely this week, and it is a disability-based benefit. So it is for someone at the moment over age 16 and up to state pension age. If you have someone who is below 16 years old, the equivalent is disability living allowance, and over state pension age, it is attendance allowance. However, the slight niche is that you can still receive personal independence payment if you are over state pension age, as long as they were receiving it beforehand. So it doesn't mean that you have to make that switch if they then turn state pension age, it might be beneficial if they do stay on personal independence payment rather than switching to attendance allowance when they reach that age, because really there is only one rate of attendance allowance, so it is beneficial sometimes to do that. So what is PIP and what does it look like? What are we talking about? There are two elements to personal independence payment. The first is the daily living component and the second is mobility component. Within each of those two elements, there are two rates, the standard rate and the enhanced rate. In order to get points and meet the criteria for those different elements, for each different element, they look at 12 different descriptors. So these are on the screen on the left-hand side, the purple and pink colours. They are 10 different descriptors that they look at in terms of the daily living component, and then 2 that they look at for the mobility component. So they are preparing food, taking nutrition, managing therapy or monitoring a health condition, washing and bathing, managing toilet needs, dressing and undressing, communicating verbally, reading and understanding signs, words and symbols, engaging with other people face-to-face, managing budgeting decisions. So they are the 10 different descriptors that they will look at and they will ask for information in relation to in terms of your ability to do those 10 different descriptors for the daily living component. It's a points-based system, so they will look at, let's take preparing food, how many points you score on their points-based system for that descriptor. It's then the same with the mobility component. So for that component, it is planning and following a journey and moving around. So they will look again separately at those, and you will score points for those systems. We'll go a little bit more in depth with the points-based system as we go through. One of the other things to mention in terms of personal independence payment is it's not means tested. So you could have a limited amount of capital in your bank account, or you can have lots of income, or your partner could have income, and they wouldn't take that into consideration. Personal independence payment is there to provide a top up for things like mobility vehicles, buying equipment because of the disability that that person has. It's a top up, it's not means tested. Next slide, please, Molly. So how much would you get at the moment? The rates change each April. There has been some talk in the news about freezing these rates, but usually they have been going up a little bit each year. So it's just something to keep an eye on. It may or may not change each April as to how much that person gets, but these are the current rates at the moment until the 6th of April. The standard rate for daily living would be £72.65. The enhanced rate would be £108.55. The standard rate for mobility is £28.70, and the enhanced rate for mobility is £75.75. So you could receive a combination of both of those. So you might receive enhanced rate daily living and standard rate mobility, or you could receive standard rate daily living and enhanced rate mobility, or one of each of the others. It combines with them both, and then you would add those figures together, and it will be paid usually weekly into your bank account. Next slide, please, Molly. Okay, so that's the background to PIP. So how would you make an application? So first of all, the new claims line. So you'd make a telephone call to the new claims line. That number is there on screen, and you would have an initial phone call. During that phone call, you would complete what's called a PIP 1 form. That is background information about the person. So it's usually things like their national insurance number, their name, the address, all of the background, basic information in terms of the initial application. What would then happen is a PIP 2 form. So this is more detailed. This is an application form that goes through those descriptors that we talked about before. It's quite a lengthy application, and it does require some time to complete that. Sometimes that can be done either over the phone, in the post, that they will send a paper copy to you, a hard copy, or sometimes if you are okay with that, they will send a link for this to be done online, and you can do it as an online application. It's the same form either way, but it's just whether you do that paper copy or online. In terms of completing that application, the top tip I would give is as much evidence you can provide as possible, whether that be something from your GP, whether that be someone you live with, for example, mum, dad, carer. It doesn't have to be anything prescriptive or anything formal or fancy. If, for example, you're doing that as mum for your adult child that's claiming PIP, you could just do a very simple A4 paper, a diary of Monday, this is what I did. I prompted this person to do this. And on Tuesday, I did this. And really spelling it out to the DWP as to exactly the support that that person is receiving. That sometimes that's often the best evidence because it's on the ground. That's exactly what the DWP are wanting to see, what's happening on a day-to-day basis with those daily living descriptors. Once you've submitted that PIP 2 application, what would happen is an assessment. So historically, pre-COVID, these were very much face-to-face assessments. It was very much sort of local to wherever that person's making the application. You would go and you would have an assessment, usually with someone like a nurse or a physiotherapist or a paramedic, someone with medical background. Post-pandemic, it was very much telephone based. So rather than people doing those face to face, it's very much been over the phone for the past couple of years. That can be beneficial or sometimes not beneficial, depending on the circumstances. If you've got someone who's very anxious about going somewhere face to face, that might have been beneficial because they might feel more comfortable at home. It's certainly easier for me to support my clients from home because I'm based all the way up in Newcastle, and I can support people all over the country over the phone without having to travel. But sometimes it was a little bit of a hindrance because sometimes it's better for that disabled person to be seen in person. You want that assessor to see the disabilities, you want to see what they're struggling with. So that got a little bit lost in the process, I would say, with the telephone assessments. The recent changes this week that the government have announced, they have talked about that this is going to go back to more face-to-face assessments. So that might be a good or bad thing depending on the person that you're supporting and helping make the claim. So yeah, they are going to be face-to-face assessments. At those assessments, I would just advise to be as honest as possible, to try and go with some examples, the types of things that you help with, just to have a little bit of an idea of the examples that person needs support with. It's always a good idea to take the copy of the PIP2 form that you've completed with you with the assessment. The assessor will already have it, but just so that you've got it with you, or the person that needs support has that with them, just to maybe prompt them and help them with what they've said and reiterate that information back to the assessor. What happens then following the assessment is a decision should be made. In terms of timescales, it very much varies as to how long the DWP take. At the moment, I think it's about 8 weeks, but some variation across the country as to how long those decisions take. When you get that decision, the decision should hopefully be pretty straightforward and correct, that let's go with the claimant's got enhanced rate both components. That's the maximum award. Fantastic. The DWP should award it for a set amount of time. So there are 2 ways that they can do this, really. Either they will put a deadline on how long the PIP award is for. So they might say, for example, from the 21st of March 2025 until the 21st of March 2028. And that means that in 2028, you should receive a PIP review form and the award will be reviewed at that point. The other option, and this is best case scenario realistically with someone with high level of needs that maybe isn't going to improve in condition, is that they can give an indefinite award. If you evidence, particularly in that application and the assessment, that person is not going to improve, their condition is permanent, then they can give an indefinite award, which means there is no end date to it and it isn't going to be reviewed in the near future. That's best case scenario. So I'm talking, you've got the decision that you think is right for the claimant. It could be whether that's the maximum rate or it could just be standard rate both components, but you think that decision is right, the points-based system, and that you think that decision is right. If you think that decision is not right, let's say they've come back, PIP and the DB have come back and said, oh, the client's only eligible for standard rate both components, and you think, oh, hold on a minute, I think they should be getting more points for that. There is an appeals process which we'll talk about further in this session today, and go through what you would then do and how that works. So that is the process. In terms of becoming an appointee, see, it might be that you are mum, or you might be family member or whoever, for a person who cannot manage their claim themselves. So it might be that they don't have capacity, or they can't manage it for whatever reason. Becoming the appointee means that you can sign the forms on behalf of the client. So when you get that PIP2 form, it will need to sign in. And if you are the appointee, you can sign it on their behalf. It also means that you can call the DWP, and as long as you can pass the security information, you can also speak on the client's behalf. So it means that the client is not having to do that themselves. The process in terms of becoming an appointee, you should do that realistically on the new claims line. So when you are calling and when you are making that initial application for PIP, if you ask to become the appointee at that point, then they should allow that to happen. they might need some evidence. For example, if you are a lay deputy or you're acting on the client's behalf, they might need some sort of evidence in relation to that in terms of the difficulties that the client has, and you should be able to provide that. If the PIP claim is ongoing and then you want to become an appointee, after that you realise that the client is struggling for whatever reason, you want to become an appointee, you can then call that the ongoing claims line, which is on the screen there, the one ending 4433, and they could then help you become the appointee for that person. Next slide, please, Molly. Okay, so we have talked about the descriptors and how you're going to get PIP. So you've done the application form, and this is the content of the PIP2, the application form. This is the things that they're going to be looking at. This is the things that they are looking for points to award on. So I'll talk a little bit about each one and the types of information to input into the form and what they're going to be looking at. Some of them are not so much as it seems, particularly the first two sort of intertwine a little bit with each other. So sometimes it's helpful just to split those up and spell out exactly what it is that they're looking at with those. So the first one is preparing food. So this looks at anything that you can think of in the kitchen. So are they having difficulty standing for a long period of time? Can they lift heavy pots and pans? Can they open jars? Have they got issues with grip? Memory? How are they forgetting that things are left in the oven? Are they having to be supervised? All of those different kind of things within the kitchen. What support do they need? So let's say you were filling out that PIP2 form and you say the client cannot remember that food is in the oven, and that they would walk away and they would forget that the hob's left on, for example. Who's supporting with that? What does that mean in terms of their ability to prepare food? Because they can't do that, mum or carer or whoever it is therefore having to do all of that food preparation for them to ensure that they are safe in the kitchen. So it's who's helping, why, what issues are they having? The same with adaptations. If they've got anything like a level measurer for pouring the kettle into hot water, if they've got, I don't know, lowered benches in the kitchen, any adaptations that make that person able to then prepare food in the kitchen is relevant to that question. So anything kitchen related is important for that one. The next one is eating and drinking. So again, sort of intertwines because we're talking about food, but this is more the actual action of being physically able to eat and drink rather than the initial bit of preparing food. If someone else prepared that food for them, how would they then be able to physically eat and drink that food? So is that person peg fed? When that food's on that plate, are they able to cut that food up themselves? Is someone chopping that up for them into smaller pieces to make it safe for them to swallow that food? Is someone prompting them to eat every day, to drink every day, because otherwise they will forget? All of this types of things, as well as aids. Have they got any OT recommended adapted cutlery to help with preparing and eating, actually eating that food? All of those things for that descriptor. The next one is managing medication and therapy. So this is about physically taking medication and therapy, managing therapy. So is that person managed with a diset box? Are they able to remember to take that medication every day? Is someone there going, hi, have you taken your medication? Is someone picking that up from the pharmacy from them? How often is that happening? With the therapy, it's again, would they remember to go to the physio on their own? Where is the therapy happening? Do they have it in the community? How many hours of the week are they having physio? How many hours a week are they having OT? All of that information in terms of the frequency and how that is managed in terms of both medication and therapy. Washing and bathing, again, we then hit the same sort of criteria, what they're looking at with the next couple of descriptors. Again, it's prompts, aids, assistance. How are they managing it? With washing and bathing, have they got a wet room? Have they got grab rails at the side of the shower to help them get in and out? How are they sort of, what parts of the body can they wash? Is it their hair that they struggle with? Is it the lower body? Can they reach? Is it bending difficulties? Is someone having to stay in the house while they are in the shower because they're at risk of having a seizure, for example? So that is the support that they need to wash and bathe. Toileting, again, The aids, the same sort of thing, grab rails. One thing that I find when I'm helping clients, if they might not have the grab rails next to the toilet, but they have, let's say, a fixed item of furniture, for example, a sink or a radiator or the bath that's close by that they are using to help themselves get on and off the toilet because they are struggling without that. Whilst that isn't a formal aid in terms of grab rails, without that fixed item of furniture, they wouldn't be able to get on and off the toilet. So that is an aid that is aiding them to do that. So things like that to help them get on and off the toilet. Is someone helping them do that? Is someone helping them clean up after they've been to the toilet? Is someone helping redress them? All of those different kind of things. Again, all of these, the frequency, is it once a day, twice a day, once a week, once a month? How often is this happening? Frequency with everything. For dressing and undressing, again, the prompts, is someone doing it for them? Which items of the body? Is it the feet that they're struggling to reach? Is it the top half of the body they're struggling to dress? With manual dexterity, is it, can they do zips? Can they do buttons? If it was freezing cold, would they know to go out with a coat on? Are they wearing dirty clothes and they need prompting to get fresh clothes on? That kind of thing. All of the support and assistance with that and the frequency again. Communication, again, this looks at word finding difficulties, how much support they need, the prompts that they get. There are different points in terms of whether that information is complex or simple information that they struggle with. Are they able to communicate at all? Would they be able to, for example, understand me saying that there's a fire? How are they able to communicate? Is someone else having to step in and reiterate information, re-explain it to them, talk them through it and put it into simple language for that person to explain? Reading is very similar again. Differences between simple and complex information. What support does that person need? Do they need any prompting? Are they struggling with that? Would they just ignore information? No. Are they able to do any sort of reading at all? Next slide, please, Molly. The next one is about engaging with others. So social things. So has that person got any social anxiety? How do they feel in crowds? How do they feel going out and about? Particularly with the types of people that we deal with at Irwin Mitchell, we have a lot of vulnerable clients. So is that person, would they go into the community and would they be vulnerable to someone taking advantage of them? Or is that person ever able to go out on their own and socialize? Are they reliant on someone going with them out to mix with others? How does that make them feel when they're out in the community? Are they anxious about it? All of those different types of things as well. Making budgeting decisions. This particularly is relevant if you are like the appointee for someone, like we talked about before. If you want to become the appointee, if that person lacks capacity, that's very relevant to this question. Are they able to calculate change? Would they be able to go into a shop and would they be able to buy milk and know that is the right amount of change to receive? Do they manage their own utility bills? If they're unable to read, as we talked about before, they obviously then would struggle with managing utility bills coming through. Would they forget their memory, their cognitive function, all of that, and who they are relying on for support, as we talked about with the others? If they're not able to do it themselves, who are they relying on? How often are they getting that support to do that? So those 10 descriptors are in relation to the daily living component. The next two are then in relation to the separate component of mobility. So the first one is planning and following a journey. So this talks about, again, the cognitive side of being able to go somewhere unfamiliar or somewhere familiar. Are they able to go to the local shop? If I said, meet me in Newcastle tomorrow, would they be able to do that? Are they struggling? What do they struggle with? Could they, if there was a diversion on the road, would they struggle to problem solve? Would they panic? Would they rely on someone else to help them with that? There are different points with that for familiar and unfamiliar journeys. So my advice and top tip with that would be to spell that out. If they can't make their way to the local shop that they've been every day for 10 years, then that's a familiar journey. If it's somewhere, a different town that they've never been to before, that's an unfamiliar journey. And what support do they need in terms of both of those? Would they always go with someone? Would someone help them plan it and then they'd be able to execute it themselves? that's really the types of things they're looking at in terms of planning, following journey, and the anxiety as well. If that would just be so overwhelming that they can't do it at all, then that's very relevant to that question. The last one there is moving around. How far can they walk? How much are they having to stop? How reliable is that? Is it that they can walk 50 meters, but probably only one day of the week, or the rest of the time they're in so much pain, or they just can't do that the majority of the time? It's about how reliable that is. And that is the same realistically in terms of all the descriptors, talking about reliability. That needs to really be on the majority of days that is happening. So when you're thinking about that, how often do they need that support, and how often is that happening? Next slide, please, Molly. So just a little bit of an example. I've only done this with just the first descriptor, just so I can explain the points-based system a little bit. So as I say, you need 8 points to get the standard rate and 12 for the enhanced rate of PIP. So the more points you get, the better, because that then increases the rate of the PIP that you're going to get and the money. So this is a good example. So as we talked about with preparing food, what can and can't they do in a kitchen? So let's take someone who has a brain injury, for example. Lots of my clients are in this situation. They would forget that the hob is on, or they would forget that something is in the oven, and that would be a risk. But they can use a microwave to put a ping meal in, because that's going to beep and that's going to tell them, oh, there's something ready, there's something there, and it's less of a risk to do so. So that would be point 2 on there. So they cannot cook a simple meal using a conventional cooker, but they are able to do so using a microwave. So that would give them 2 points for that descriptor. Then you go through all the other descriptors and they will do the same sort of thing. There is points for each of those different criteria that they would look at, and you gather points then to equate to hopefully 8 or 12 points for the daily living and the mobility component. So I haven't put this on there, but this is something that is going to likely be changing from what the government has announced this week. So at the moment, you could, for example, get 2 points for preparing food, 2 points for dressing and undressing, 2 points for reading, 2 points for communication, 2 points for budgeting, and that would give you, let's say, 8 points, and you'd get the standard rate. The change that is happening is, for at least one of those descriptors, you have to get 4 points from a sole descriptor alone. For example, with this one, you would need to meet the need supervision or assistance to either prepare or cook a simple meal, that 4-point descriptor, in order to get anything for PIP at all. So it's quite a change, because before you could have built up the 8 points from 2 points, 2 points, 2 points, but now you need to have at least one 4-point descriptor as such to do that. In terms of timescales and things, it's going to be a couple of years, and we don't know so much yet how it's going to work in terms of if they're going to look back, or it's just going to be from new claims going forwards. But that is just something to consider, that you would need 4 points for at least one of those. Next slide, please, Molly. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully, as I said previously, you would do the application and you would get the right decision the first time. But unfortunately, that isn't always the case. The DWP just unfortunately make some quite poor decisions sometimes, which makes it, well, it gives me a job in one respect, that I'm constantly challenging these decisions and making sure people are on the right level of benefits. So the process in terms of doing that, so once you get that decision, you realise, okay, client is only getting standard rate of daily living, and I think he should be getting enhanced rate of daily living and some mobility component as well. So what would you do then? The first step is what's called mandatory reconsideration. So that is an internal DWP process, which basically means that once you've requested that, they will re-look at that decision. It will be looked at again by an internal DWP decision maker. When you get the letter with the decision on, stating the initial award that the client's been given, it will tell you that you have 1 month to appeal that decision. That isn't quite the case. So yes, you have 1 month in an ideal world to do that. However, we very much here work to the 13-month timescale as long as we are obtaining further medical evidence. Firstly, to not rush what we're saying, we want to make sure that when we request that mandatory reconsideration, that it's hopefully going to be successful to avoid having to go any further with it. So what we would do in terms of obtaining further medical evidence and using that time and using that 13 months to hopefully make it successful, the first thing we would do is we would go back to the DWP and ask for what's called the medical assessment report. So once the client had done the application and then they've then had that assessment, the person doing that assessment writes a report that goes back to the DWP. You have every right as the client to ask for a copy of that report, and they should be able to send you it. That is the most important evidence that you can get when challenging any of these decisions. It is sometimes damning that it's very copy and pasted. It hasn't looked at exactly what the client said, and that is going to be the best thing to evidence in your mandatory reconsideration that that decision is not right. In terms of mandatory reconsideration and how to do that, you could do it over the phone, but my advice would be to do a written submission if you can in relation to that. So get that decision. You've requested the medical assessment report. You're using that 13 months. You're gathering evidence. You could get something from the GP. You could get something from mum. The carer could write a statement. Gather all of that evidence and then make a written submission to the DWP enclosing that evidence and disputing what you are saying. So let's say the person got 10 points already in the decision and you think the person should have got 12 points because they should have got 2 points for preparing food that they haven't already been given. Don't talk about all of the other descriptors. Don't talk about anything that they've already got points for. Just home in on that one thing or the two things or however many things that you think is wrong and that you want to challenge. Spell it out to them. Make their life easy. This is the descriptor we're challenging. This is why. Here's the evidence. Please reconsider it. Use that 13 months to gather that, to pull it all together. You could do it after 6 months, you could do it after 3 months, however long it takes you to gather that information, but use that time to do that and to make that hopefully as successful as you can. It will also help you at the appeal stage if you get to that stage, if that's not successful. So that's the first stage of the appeal. So let's say you have got the mandatory reconsideration submitted. They have, sometimes it's really fast how quickly they look at it. Sometimes it can be months and months and months. At the moment, I think I called earlier this week and they're taking about 15 weeks to have a look at those from when they're submitted. So that's relatively quick in terms of DWP turnaround, to be honest. But keep chasing it, make sure they've got it, make sure they're processing it, keep calling them, chasing it. Then you should get a decision again. Similar to the initial decision, you'll get another decision. This is called a mandatory reconsideration notice. Hopefully, because you've done a really good submission, you've got all the evidence, it will be successful at that stage. They are very successful at that stage. It's quite rare now that we get to tribunal stage because we do that really good submissions and enclosing all the evidence. Hopefully that means that you will get that decision at that stage. However, if you don't, again, same process, same sort of procedure. So this time, rather than an internal process, it would be going to a tribunal hearing. As with the mandatory reconsideration, you've got the same 13 months. The letter will tell you 1 month, but that isn't the case. The regulations and the law in relation to it is that you have 13 months to make that request to the tribunal. So that is a totally separate appeal. It's not DWP. It's been looked at by a separate panel. My advice in terms of doing that, you can either do it through the HMCTS website, which is all online, or you can do an SSCS1 form that is also on there and send that in the post and send it to them in the post. If you've done a really good submission to the mandatory reconsideration stage, it should be pretty straightforward to do the appeal, that you can use the same document. If they haven't changed anything from mandatory reconsideration, you're just going to say pretty much the same thing again, but you enclose the mandatory reconsideration. Again, look at what's happened. Has anything changed since then in terms of the points that they've awarded, and just spell that out to them again. Tips on applying and the process and appeals. I know the forms look awful. They're really long. The appeal forms are long. It looks daunting. Do it separate, even if you take 12 days and you do one descriptor a day, or just do it in your own time. You can ask for extensions. Are usually quite okay with you asking for an extension. Normally it's sort of 1 month, the deadline that they give you to return the forms. But if you need more time, just call and ask for that extension. It's absolutely fine. You can't have too much evidence. Like I say, sometimes the simplest of evidence, just a diary on an A4 piece of paper from mum is the best piece of evidence that you can get. Be credible with what you're saying. As I was saying with the mandatory reconsideration and the appeal, don't talk about things, or don't feel like you have to say I can't prepare food if you can prepare food, but you have issues with everything else. Be honest. Don't exaggerate. Keep it just exactly as it is with the application, with the appeals, with all of it. Just be truthful and don't go too far with one of the descriptors that you maybe don't have issues with. Just focus on the ones that you do have issues with. In terms of keeping your own records, keep a copy of the application, keep a point score. How many do you think you should get? And that will help you then throughout the process. If you get that decision, think, well, I got 8 points for this. Oh yeah, that matches what I thought I should get. Then you know that decision is right. Yeah, again, we talked about the majority of the time and that day to day. So yeah, that is the process of that form. Just in terms of the tribunal and go into that tribunal, if you get that far, I'm just flitting back a little bit there. Let's say you get to tribunal stage, you are going to be waiting a long time once you've made that submission. So I have some at the moment that I've been waiting pretty much 2 years for a tribunal date. So you've made that submission and they've asked you to do it within a time scale, but then unfortunately you'll be waiting a couple of years probably till you even get that hearing date, which I know is very frustrating for people because they're not probably getting any money, or they're not getting that payment in the meantime that they think they should be eligible for. The good thing with the timescales is that it is, or it should be, backdated. If it's successful, they will backdate it. So often then you get a lump sum if it is successful at the end. In terms of my team and doing appeals to tribunal, it's very, very rare that we're not successful, probably about a 99.9% success rate. So it's worth thinking about it and doing it. And I appreciate it's really daunting going to a tribunal hearing and it feels very formal, but the success rates of doing so are really high. So it is worth considering. It is usually in like a local magistrate's court, or it is a very formal environment to go to tribunal, which can, again, as I say, be daunting, but they're human. They've heard it all. It's nothing new to them, and it's worth a go. On the day, it's usually a panel of 3 people at a tribunal hearing. It is a judge, a disability assessor, and then a medical expert like a doctor. You can get representation. Different local authorities, sitting as advice, local charities, things like that can represent and help you at tribunal. And then if that is successful, hopefully great, as I say, backdated. If not, there is one more challenge process, but it's very rare that this happens. This is to an upper tribunal, but that can only be taken that far if there is an error in law, and it does get quite complex. So at that stage, I would advise that you seek some definitely advice from someone who's an expert in that area. Okay, next slide, please, Molly. Okay, so the transition from DLA to PIP, there might be quite a lot of families here today that may be going through this process, and that might be why you're interested in this today. So prior to your child's 16th birthday, you should hear from the DWP about that transition, even if the child has been given a DLA lifetime award. The conditions and the criteria between DLA and PIP are very different. You'll have been probably familiar with DLA, and then I'm now talking about this points-based system with PIP, which is very different to how DLA is looked at. So that's something to consider. It's not an automatic transfer either. So as I say, you would have to make that new application for PIP, even if they've been getting DLA. It's not automatic. Even if you get that letter, you would still have to call PIP and do that and go through the process. but a letter should be received. If you don't receive that letter, I would advise to either chase the DLA or PIP to make sure that that is progressed. They should then pay the DLA until the PIP decision has been made. So there shouldn't be a gap in payment as such. It should be that the DLA is continuously paid until that PIP is then in payment, and then no overlap between those. Next slide, please, Molly. So carers allowance. So this is something, obviously not PIP, but it's triggered by PIP, and it might be relevant to some people on the call in that they are caring for someone that is receiving PIP. So if, let's say, you are caring for that person receiving PIP over 35 hours a week, your income is less than £151 a week after tax and national insurance contributions, and that person receives the daily living component, then you should be eligible for carers allowance. The daily living component received, it can be either rate, it can be standard or enhanced. As long as they're receiving that daily living component, that's absolutely fine. Going back to the 35 hours a week, that again, it can be any type of care. It doesn't have to be you physically showering them or washing them, whatever it is. It's any type of care that you are doing. It might be driving them to appointments, it might be emotional support, it could be support in the day, support in the night. Any type of care you are providing, you should make that within that 35 hours and then make that application for carers allowance. Something just to bear in mind how that does intertwine with other benefits is that if you receive universal credit, the carers allowance will be deducted pound for pound from the universal credit. So it might not always be the best financial option to claim carers allowance because it would be deducted from universal credit. So it might be that you need to seek some advice just in relation to that checking and calculation. The good thing with carers allowance is that if you are unable to work because, let's say, you obviously 35 hours a week is a big commitment to care for someone, that can count as your national insurance contributions towards your state pension when you reach state pension age, if you've received carers allowance for the set amount of years. So that's something to consider as well, that if you're in a position that you haven't worked and then you're going to reach state pension age, you obviously want to claim state pension. This could hopefully help towards those contributions to do so. Next slide, please, Molly. I think we're on the last one. So PIP and other benefit entitlement. So as I said at the start, if you get PIP, then you cannot receive DLA or attendance allowance at the same time. So they are each standalone benefits. So it's really important that if you're getting PIP, that all of those others stop. It's not means tested. So if you receive universal credit, it's not going to be deducted or anything like that. Housing benefit or council tax, all of the other means tested benefits, PIP will not impact on those. It is completely standalone and would not impact those means tested benefits. Another benefit that could be beneficial, if you get the enhanced rate of the mobility component, it might be that you're then eligible for a motability vehicle, which is obviously subsidised and good access for people with a disability to have access to a car. It's a really good scheme, so that is something to consider as well if you need a car and getting that enhanced rate mobility component. And the final one is a blue badge. So if you receive 8 points for the moving around descriptor of PIP, that will be automatic entitlement to a blue badge. You would have to make an application still through the local authority, but if you've got the letter saying you get 8 points for that moving around descriptor, it's very straightforward, automatic eligibility for a blue badge. The other way that you can claim it is if you have a hidden impairment. So this affects lots of my clients really, Irwin Mitchell, that they have hidden impairments. So brain injury, for example, that yes, they don't meet the 8 points for the moving around descriptor. However, if they, let's say, struggle in a car park, they wouldn't know not to step in front of a car, or they wouldn't be able to use a parking ticket machine. All of those kind of things is a hidden impairment. So you would still be able to make that application for a blue badge through the local authority website. But rather than it being automatic, they then would ask you for an assessment usually, and they ask for quite a bit more information. So it is that you can get it. It's just a bit more of a process to get that, but it's worth having again for those parking situations. The final way that you can qualify for a blue badge is if the person has bulky or heavy equipment carried in the vehicle. That's something to think about as well. Okay, that is the end, shall we? I can see some questions popping through. Shall we go through those, Kate?
Yeah, I was just going to say before we do that, I'll just say thank you to you for presenting the webinar. We'll stop the recording before we go to the questions. I just think that's wise. Um, but yeah, thank you, Melissa, Molly, Zoe, and everybody that's joined the webinar. This will be recorded and shared to everybody that's booked on. So we're not stopping now. We're just going to stop recording. Okay, just one second.